Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rachna Kaushal, working as in political science at Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. And today I'll be sharing with you my views on the issues of development of women in post-independence India. I have taken this topic because I want to analyze the approach of the state vis-a-vis women. Nowadays, there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of the government is talking a lot about sensitization of people towards gender equality, gender justice, and all. And that's why I decided this topic to share my views with you. In my talk, there'll be three important categories: women, state, and of course development. Defining women as a homogeneous group or category is a difficult task because of the plurality of identities. On the basis of caste, class, religion, and other cultural affiliations, it is very difficult to define women as a homogeneous group. Irrespective of all these identities, women were declared as the most backward section of every community way back in 1975 by the report of the Committee on the Status of Women in India. This report was popularly known as Towards Equality. Despite this, they are denied the status of backward classes for the purpose of affirmative action. Constitutionally, however, they are recognized as a weaker section, and the state is supposed to make provisions for their special protection. But as a matter of fact, there has really been no women policy in the post-colonial era. State that I am referring to here is the post-independence state or a post-colonial state, which is committed to the modern values of democracy, socialism, equality, and social justice to all its citizens, and where citizenship is free from caste, creed, religion, region, and sex-based identities. Coming to the third term, that is development. In the present era, the term development is very broad. The term is now a dynamic concept that has undergone tremendous metamorphism. Initially, it meant only economic development that can be quantitatively measured in terms of income and employment. It was in the mid-1970s that the term sustainable was added to development. Today, one talks about sustainable development and not mere development, which is measured only quantitatively. Rather, it has qualitative dimension as well, defined in terms of the quality of human life. That is, what is the impact of development on the human life? To what extent we have been able to improve the standard of living of the people through the process of development. And it was in 1994 that Mehboob ul Haq gave us the concept of human development, whereby a number of indexes like health, education, and the various living standard of people will determine the concept of development. In the present discussion also, development is viewed as a policy mechanism to accomplish gender equality. Though the Constitution of India enshrines to the goals of gender-based equality as a fundamental right, and the idea of social justice goes back to has been articulated through various directive principles of a state policy, but the discourse on women and development to assure gender equality goes back to the colonial period, that is the pre-independence era. Even before the idea regarding the role of women in development appeared on the international plans, it was already talked about in India in the decades of 1930s. In fact, a subcommittee to advise on women was established under the National Planning Committee constituted by the Congress in, I suppose, 1939-40. The committee clearly emphasized on the importance of independent economic means for women. It made some very significant recommendations. A few I would like to discuss here. Like, for example, economic value of housework be recognized in lieu of payment, and facilities and rights as workers should be extended to women for the domestic work. Secondly, they should have absolute control on a portion of their husband's income. Women workers should have full control over their earning. and instead of imposing a ban on night work that continues till say the decade of 70s, that not only excludes women from employment, more conducive work conditions should be created. Now these ideals were visualized way back in 1939 and 40, much before independence. Thus, the idea of women in development has very early roots in India, but unfortunately, the legacy of colonial period did not continue in the post-colonial period. Well, the issue of women in development, I'll be examining this issue of women in development under three phases characterized by the state's approach towards women issues and problems. First is the welfare approach, second is the development approach, and third is the empowerment approach. The welfare approach is the period from first 5-year plan to sixth 5-year plan can be well defined as the period of welfare approach. By the end of sixth 5-year plan up till eighth 5-year plan, we can call it as the development approach period, and 92 onwards we can call it a empowerment approach period. Well, as I told you, that period from first 5-year plan to sixth 5-year plan, that is 51 to 78, can well be called as a period of welfare approach towards the problems and issues of women. In this period, women were perceived not as an object of development but only for welfare. The various public policies and schemes of state were meant only for the welfare of women, that too not for the welfare of women as an individual, but rather women as a mother. The plans during this period emphasized their roles in the household and community. Most of the government schemes aimed at providing maternal benefits. However, in the second and third 5-year plans, some problems of women workers were recognized, resulting in some major recommendations. And these recommendations were to protect them from hazardous work for which they were physically unfit, equality of opportunity, equal pay for equal work, reduction in income and disparities. But these recommendations remained confined to the plan papers, and the government did little to implement them through public policy. Women failed to get their due place in the agricultural, industrial, and labor policy. The government approach to the problems of women was more in terms of charity rather than empowerment. There was, in fact, no plan or policy for training them in a manner that may enable them to be self-dependent. In most of the welfare schemes, amount dispersed was too meager. Economic output of women in terms of their contribution towards the economies of household, community, and the nation was not acknowledged. Also, neither their present nor their future economic role was identified. Despite a large number of women workers employed in unorganized sector, no efforts were made to provide them any kind of legal protection. The main problems faced by workers in the unorganized sectors are the issues like low wages, no service benefits, no fixed working hours, and there are no workers' unions or organization to defend or protect their rights. Consequently, a sector where more than 90% of female workers are employed is the most exploitative sector of the economy without any kind of legal protections. Now, this indicated, you can say, the non-acceptance of women as a viable economic force, as various economic policies, schemes of the government are still drafted from the charity perspective, and that's why I'm calling it a welfare approach period, because what we are focusing is only the charity and not the development of women. Another trend noticed in the government policy was the gender stereotyping of the jobs, where women were perceived to be most suitable for certain kinds of jobs like, say, air hostesses, receptionists in the army, only as doctors and nurses in the defense forces, and number of women in high echelon jobs were still very, very low. The result was that there were very few women in the decision making process, and their role in the decision making continued to be very, very low, and therefore most of the time women issues could not make the headlines as far as the pro-women policies are concerned. Not only the economic policies and plans, but also the laws that were drafted during this period are a reflection of the indifference and insensitivity of state towards women issues. State legalized the job stereotyping by, you can say, legally prohibiting women's entry into certain jobs and sectors. Like in defense, they cannot enter as commissioned officer as they can do now. Similarly, there were discriminatory service conditions for female employees, like Air India Employees Service Regulations 46 and 47 provided for compulsory retirement in the event of air hostesses' marriage within 4 years. Also, as per the rules in Indian Foreign Services Conduct and Discipline, Rules 1961 and IFS Recruitment, Cadre, Seniority and Promotions rules, women members were required to obtain permission of the government before they get married. And if they get married, they can be sacked from their jobs any times on the grounds of efficiency. Now, what this efficiency is was nowhere defined, nor there was such kinds of clause for the male IFS officer, as a result of which most of the female IFS officers either quit the job or they remain unmarried during their service tenures. But everything was not so negative. There were certain positive steps also which were taken up by the government during this period to accomplish the goal of gender equality, like for example equality in the property rights by drafting the Hindu Code Bill. So, Hindu Code Bill, the drafting of Hindu Code Bill was one very positive step that took place during that period, and it brought about a number of positive changes, like it recognized, it legalized divorce, it prohibited polygamy, it legalized intercaste marriages, and to some extent property rights were also given to the women. But you see, a close analysis of Hindu personal law reflects the gap between the rhetoric and reality. Though it was passed with a fanfare to bring about gender equality, but in fact there were a number of anti-women provisions in this code. The code relied on Mitakshara school of Hindu law as far as property inheritance was concerned, rather than the Dayabhaga. The former rests on male co-parcenary that allowed the prevalence of male dominance. Only the senior most male in a Hindu undivided family is Karta, or the manager or the operator. Daughters lose their rights if they marry. Hindu joint family thus runs in male descent, and descent through female is excluded. Similarly, many states drafted laws which deprived married women of their inheritance rights in the land. For example, the UP Zamindari Abolition Act of 1951 that allowed the owner to will his land to whomever he chose in the name of preventing subdivision of land. Now, this created a situation where daughters were likely to be the loser of their property rights in the matter of dowry related crimes. The Dowry Prohibition Act 1961 was another positive step that was taken up by the government, but again a close analysis of Dowry Prohibition Act also reveals that it was more a protection to the culprits rather than to the victims of the dowry harassment and death, because the term dowry was defined in very narrow terms. Dowry was defined as something taken at the time of marriage only. Before and after the marriage, whatever is taken in the form of dowry was not considered as dowry, and both the givers as well as the receivers of dowry were declared as culprits. So, obviously nobody will go and file a report that I have given that much of dowry to the groom and his family. Thirdly, the dowry harassment reports can be filed only within 1 year of the marriage, which is quite a short time. So, you see that a close scrutiny of the Dowry Prohibition Act 1961 will reveal that it was more a protection to the culprit rather than to the victim of the dowry harassment and death. Just to sum up the welfare approach, one may observe that the Indian state was more inclined to support patriarchy rather than implement the ideals of gender equality and social justice. Not only that the state did not acknowledge women as productive units of the economy, and also in contrast to its constitutional commitment to gender equality and social justice, it was drafting discriminatory laws, service, property, as well as criminal laws, all kinds of laws, whether it is a service law or it is a law related to property or it is a criminal law, they all were in fact denying any legal protection to women as far as this particular period is concerned. So, a state was concerned only with the welfare of women without thinking about women's development. Consequently, this period is characterized by the absence of any specific policy or plans or schemes to facilitate women's development. Well, this was all about the welfare approach period. Well, one can see certain positive changes in the attitude of the state towards the end of the fifth 5-year plan. There was a shift from welfare to development approach. The concept of development was undergoing a lot of change. Development, which was until then understood in terms of economic growth or economic development, now included additional dimensions in the form of human development criteria and sustainable development criteria. The new concept of development got reflected in the various international and national policy documents prepared in the wake of the United Nations Decade for Women in the mid 1970s. You see, the shift in the approach of the Indian state can well be seen in the light of a number of international developments which were now taking place vis-a-vis women. 75 to 85 as the Decade of Women, and as such in India also a committee was set up to study the status of women, that is the Committee on the Status of Women in India, that facilitated a shift in the approach of a state towards women from welfare to development. Well, women were now accepted as critical inputs of for national development rather than just the beneficiaries of welfare policies. The report of CSWI explained the pathetic state of women defined in terms of serious imbalances and disparities such as declining sex ratio, lower expectancy of life, higher infant and maternal mortality, declining work participation, etc. Consequently, National Plan for Action was designed in 1976 that called for a planned action by government in the areas of health, family planning, nutrition, education, employment, etc. Also, Women's Welfare and Development Bureau was set up in 1976. In fact, it was integration of both welfare as well as the development approach that can be seen in these various plans and policies drafted during this period. It was only in 6th 5-year plan that women could get enough space to be included as a separate chapter. Excuse me. Also, working group on employment of women at the Planning Commission was set up that made several recommendations to improve the productivity of women's traditional occupations. Well, lack of access to resources was identified as one of the major obstacles in the way of development. While in the welfare approach, women were invisible members of in the entire social milieu, in development approach, women received separate visibility. In the context of government policies and programs, special schemes were launched for enhancing women's employment status from 1978 to 83. In 78-79, IRDP, that is Integrated Rural Development Program, was initiated as a pilot project in about 50 districts. In principle, it was a sound scheme, but in fact, it could not yield much as far as women were concerned. National Rural Employment Program or NREP was launched in 1980, and RLEGP, that is Rural Endless Employment Guarantee Program, was launched in 1983, and they were merged into a larger program called Jawahar Rozgar Yojana. What was important in Jawahar Rozgar Yojana for women was that 30% of employment opportunities were reserved for women. In 1991, the share of women in employment generation was 24%. Similarly, under Development of Women and Children in Rural Areas, that is DWCRA program, in 1982, a special scheme was a special scheme that aimed at strengthening the gender component of IRDP. Under this scheme, 28,000 women groups were formed. In 1989, out of 68.85 lakh members of daily cooperative societies, 14% were women. A reference has to be made to the states of Gujarat and Andhra, where milk and dairy cooperatives of women were formed, but it failed to identify activities that would generate sustained incomes. Well, women cooperative societies were also set up in fisheries, and special attention was given to the fisheries sector. But there were certain very important programs like Lab to Land and setting up of Krishi Vigyan Kendras benefited women in agricultural and allied sector. Well, under the training of rural young for youth for self-employment TRIAS program, 4.59 lakh women were trained for the development of women and children in rural areas. Well, public policy now focused on schemes facilitating self-employment among educated and unemployed youth with a priority to women. Ministry of Labour launched a new scheme to providing grants and aid to state governments for setting up women ITIs. Now, there were a lot of factors, as it is, there was a change in national and international scenario. The economic development of women was not only the issue demanding attention, but the legal protection to social and personal aspects of women were also on the agenda. National campaigns were organized by women organizations for amending the criminal law. And in this regard, I think the decade of 1980s is very, very important, as it can well be designated as the decade of pro-women legislation. 1982, for the first time, the antique rape law of 1890 was amended after the famous Mathura tribal rape case, where in this particular case a 16-year-old woman eloped with her boyfriend and she was raped in the police custody. The Sessions Court gave a safe escape to the culprits on the pretext that a woman who has run away with her boyfriend cannot be raped, and she is a woman of low character, since there were no signs of passive resistance, hence it was not a rape, and that really agitated the women activists, and they were on the roads demanding change in this antique rape law of 1890 that was drafted way back in the British period. Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961 was also amended, and it was amended twice in 1984 and very quickly in 1986 to make it more stringent, and thereby dowry related cases became non-bailable and it became more stringent. However, the submission of a state in 1985 in the famous Shah Banu case and the consequent Muslim women Protection of Rights on Divorce Acts 1986 showed the non-seriousness of the government towards women issues and their subordination to patriarchal and fundamentalist forces. Despite constitutional and legal protection, crimes against women continued to increase, and you can see the graph of crime going higher and higher. I won't go into much of data because it becomes very monotonous then. It was not completely the failure of laws that was responsible for the rise of crimes against women, but there were a number of socio-economic and cultural reasons as well, which are not properly addressed by the society and the state. There were, however, changes in the statistics for the good. That is, the number of women workers in the organized sectors increased from 13.7 lakhs in 62 to 35.7 lakhs in 1989, that is from 11.3% to 13.7%. However, the percentage of women in higher echelon jobs was still very, very low, and it was not very high. The percentage of women holding gazetted positions in 1988 was only 4.9%. In 87, the share of women IS officers was only 7.4%, and IFS was only 9.9%, and IES, that is the Indian Economic Services, was 12.9%. Now, this reflected the women's underrepresentation in the major decision making processes or the decision making bodies. Well, 8th plan onwards, we can recognize. We can say that we entered into the era of empowerment approach. Human development became the core of all development efforts. Health, education, literacy and basic needs like drinking water, housing were the new indices of development. Moreover, the plan recognized the need to involve people in the process of development. Now, development was for the first time defined as a two-way process where people cannot be the passive recipients but they also have to be the active participants in the process of development, and development was defined as an inalienable right of every individual and all the people. Now, the plan reflected, the 8th plan reflected clearly the intentions of the state to change the attitude of total dependence on the government for the development activities and to encourage proactive attitude of the people. Thus, the concept of development, as I told you, has undergone change in two ways. Firstly, development is being measured not only quantitatively, that is in terms of income and employment only, but also qualitatively, that is in terms of amenities enhancing human life like health, education, etc. Now, this change in the concept of development and integration of people in the process of development received as a two-way process was a consequence of right to development principle as elaborated by the Vienna Declaration of 1992. So, you see lot of changes at the international level are also influencing the approach or the attitude of the state towards development and particularly vis-a-vis women. Notwithstanding all these efforts, the public policy still remained ill equipped to address the problem of women in respect of their unemployment or underemployment. But there were certain positive steps also, and one very positive step towards the empowerment of women was the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act that provided for women's reservation in local self-government. Now, inappropriate political representation in legislature at various stages is one of the reasons for the absence of pro-women centered public policy. I remember once I read an article by Margaret Alva, and while raising the issue of the air hostesses in the parliament, because of their smaller strength, women were unable to raise the issues related to women, and when Margaret Alva tried to raise the issue of air hostesses, one of the male member of parliament said, "Alva ji, आपके पास कोई और issues नहीं होते हैं क्या पार्लियामेंट में डिस्कस करने के लिए?" I mean, because there is ill representation, under representation of women in legislature, most of the time the women issues are neglected. They are not properly even discussed, leave aside having a pro-women policy on different issues. So, though representation of women at grassroots level may not be enough for their development leading to empowerment, but definitely it was a good beginning. It was a step forward as far as women's development or empowerment is concerned. Development as perceived in the earlier plans continued in the 10th plan, well together with emphasis on good governance, facilitating the empowerment of women. Civil society was acknowledged as one of the major players in the process of development. Disbursement of benefits and integration of various public institutions like panchayat, village education committees and local health committees, etc. Special emphasis was laid on the rural and social sector. Women and children were recognized as vulnerable groups. Importance of female literacy was particularly acknowledged. The plan also observed the increasing gender bias in society, declining sex ratio and decreasing women's share in labor force, which again reflected ongoing gender bias. Well, considering these facts, gender equality was made an integral part of development. Therefore, a number of development and employment oriented schemes were launched like Khadi and Village Development Units, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan for education and vocational training, Rashtriya Samvikas Yojana, Swayan Jayanti Gram Swarojgar, Sampoorn Gramin Rozgar Yojana, etc. But none of these schemes, as a matter of fact, none of these schemes made any difference to women with regard to their poor condition. But there were certain positive steps, as I told you, that in 1994 there was a shift in the attitude of the state, like women can now join defense forces as commissioned officer instead of just being doctors and nurses in the army. One major step that took place during this period towards gender equality was the passing of Hindu Succession Act of 2005, which addressed the gender inequalities on several fronts as agricultural land, Mitakshara joint family system, parental dwelling house and certain widows' rights. Well, firstly, it brought all agricultural land at par with other property and made Hindu women's inheritance rights in land legally equal to women overriding any inconsistent state laws. Secondly, all daughters, especially married daughters, were made co-partners in joint family property. Thirdly, it gave all daughters, married or not, the same right as sons to reside in or to seek partition of the family dwelling house. Fourthly, the act allowed widows to inherit property of the deceased husband even if they get remarried. The amendment no doubt can have far reaching implications not only for women but for her whole family and increase their livelihood options, prospects for education, health, and help reduce domestic violence. One very important step or the legislation that was passed during this period in favor of women was the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, where I suppose this is one of the best pieces of legislations ever made in India. The act is significant in many ways in the sense that domestic violence that was perceived until now as a part and participle of culture has finally been recognized as a crime. It broadly defines the crime to include physical, mental and other kinds of cruelties, and it also widens up the definitions of perpetrators. Not only the parents, not only the husband and the in-laws, but even the parental family, brothers, boyfriends, etc. can be the perpetrators as per this particular act is concerned. It is perhaps one of the acts that can really be called as being pro-women. And then in 2013, in an expansion of, or you can see that the 1998 Vishakha guidelines on protection of women against sexual harassment were translated into an act in 2013 when a law was passed to protect women against sexual harassment at workplace. So, from the above analysis, that I have discussed with you, you see that a number of 5-year plans, public policies, programs and laws becomes very clear that the state's perception about women has undergone a positive change over a period of time. The change is the consequence of the assertion of women's rights both at the national and the international level, but the goal of gender equality still remains elusive. Now, our present government is also taking up a number of steps. It is a lot concerned about women and their rights, and is doing a lot to sensitize the general masses about women's rights, gender equality and gender justice. And we are seeing a number of plans and policies by the state like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao Andolan, then Sukanya Samriddhi scheme, then Swachh Bharat Yojana, which is more beneficial to women because open defecation is more a problem to women rather than to men, because it includes a number of security issues. Then the government of India, the present government of India has also passed a scheme that is step support to training and employment program for women so that they can take up gainful employment, and it also provides the right competencies and training for women to become entrepreneurs, and it is open to every woman above the age of 16. Then you have the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, whereas the account can be opened up at any Indian post office or a branch of an authorized commercial bank any time between the birth of the girl child till the age of 10 by a parent or a guardian, and only one account is allowed per child and parents with a minimum of rupees 1000 deposited into it, but there is no limit to the number of deposits either in a month or in a financial year. But and there are the government has also focused on you can see the creation of a number of working women hostels to ensure availability of safe, convenient accommodation for working family, provided the gross income does not exceed 50,000 per month. And the most important thing about this working women is that the rent charged from women should not exceed 15% of their total emoluments, gross salary in the case of single bedrooms, 10% in case of double bedrooms, and 7.5% in the case of dormitories. So very cheap and safe accommodation provision has been made through working women hostels as proposed by this government. Then Mahila Shakti Kendra have been created to empower rural women with opportunities for skill development, employment, digital literacy, health and nutrition. and also you see that Mahila Heart, one very important step that has been scheme that has been launched by this government is the Mahila Heart, among the many services that have been provided by this government, especially for women, which Mahila Heart is facilitating a direct contact between the vendors and the buyers, sensitization, advocacy, training, packing and soft intervention workshops, and offering a web based approach. This all has been done, but the point is that simply by making the laws stringent, by creating more laws, by making such grand schemes like Mahila Heart, can we really empower women? My answer is no. That law is important, of course, and there is no dearth of good laws, good pro-women laws also in India, but the point is that there is lack of legal education as far as women are concerned. Women themselves are not ready to make use of these laws and take advantage of these laws if they are in any trouble. Most of the time they do not know that any law exists as far as their property rights and their protection against various crimes is concerned. You see, for example, as far as domestic violence is concerned, 90% of women do not accept domestic violence as a kind of crime. So in this kind of scenario, even if we make such a good pro-women law like Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, obviously we cannot make use of these laws. Similarly, there are a number of schemes, but there is lack of literacy, there is lack of awareness amongst the people, and most importantly, if we have to ensure gender justice and gender equality, besides the efforts of the state, what is important is the change of mindset which is required. Until unless we change our mindset to give women equal rights in the property and to really give them a bit of respect, we cannot protect women against any kind of gender injustices or any kinds of crimes against them. So in order to protect women or in order to guarantee gender justice to women, a change of mindset along with the state policies is important. Well, state policies are important, no doubt, but what is more important is the change in the mindset of the people, the role of the civil society, sensitization amongst people. Women have to get the courage to come up if anything wrong happens with them, come up and fight against the injustice against them. Then only the state's policies, plans and the laws made by the state can be successful. Thank you so much. The house is open for any comments if there are. Well, I think as far as Uniform Civil Code is concerned, definitely it is one of the goals that we enshrined as far as our constitution is concerned. You see that in order to give a kind of security to our minorities, we gave them the freedom to have their own personal laws. The personal laws are something that are related to, that deals with the laws on marriage, divorce, inheritance, property, etc. But you see that these are one of the most discriminatory laws also. The religion is misused by the people to deny women an equal right. Well, as far as Hindu community is concerned, the Indian state took a daring step by drafting Hindu personal law, and today after the Hindu Succession Amendment Act of 2005, I think we have brought women at par with men. But again, I would say that as far as the property rights are concerned, women cannot have an access to that kind of equality which is now guaranteed to us through Hindu Succession Act until unless people change their mindset. The Uniform Civil Code particularly aims at creating a kind of a civil code, just like we have common Indian Penal Code, we have common Criminal Procedure Code. Similarly, we will have a common civil code where there will be almost uniform, I won't say universal, I won't say absolute uniformity, but a space will be given to the personal laws, keeping in mind the ideals of gender justice. Like for example, triple talaq has recently been banned by the Government of India. It is something which is not sanctioned by religion, and therefore the importance of Uniform Civil Code lies in the fact that whatever is not permissible by the religion should be allowed to the women. For example, recently temple entry reform has been done. The temple entry and entry into a number of dargahs has been permitted to women by the court through court's judgment. Similar kinds of changes will be done through Uniform Civil Code. As far as personal laws are concerned, the religious freedom is concerned, it will remain there, but there will be certain common features like registration of marriage, so that we can avoid polygamy. Triple features like triple talaq will no more be there, which are more against women and do not have any kind of religious sanction. Similarly, equal property rights as far as women's shares are concerned. Yes, of course, that is wrong. This is what the Uniform Civil Code is going to do. I mean, gradually we are moving towards that side, that we are banning all those things which are not legally which are not permissible by the religion, and therefore they are practiced in the name of religion. For example, polygamy was practiced in the Hindu community, but through Hindu code bill we banned polygamy, but still it is practiced. No, that's what I am saying, that mere law is not important. Just by having a law we cannot ban anything. We cannot get rid of triple talaq, we cannot get rid of polygamy just by law, just by making a law, but just by putting a legal ban on them. But we need to have a change in the mindset of the people. We need to sensitize the people that this is a violation of the rights of women, and women is also an individual who deserves certain human rights, certain basic rights, whatever are enjoyed by males in this country. So there are no more comments or issues that we need to discuss further. Thank you so much.